So you mentioned that Jung wasn't in himself religious, but obviously he was fascinated by religion. So was it maybe the case that Jung believed that the stories in, say, the Bible are not objectively and scientifically true, but the interpretation of the stories can be? I don't know if that makes sense. Like fundamentally, they can be true. The morals and the symbolism of the stories are true. And maybe they weren't the intention behind these stories weren't for them to be believed, but for them to be interpreted in a meaningful way.
Jung took a middle road. He said he had a very interesting relationship with a Catholic priest named Victor White in the late 1940s and 1950s. And Victor White was a Dominican, taught at Oxford. He was steeped in medieval theology, a professor of Thomistic theology, Thomas Aquinas. And he took a great interest in Jung's psychology because he thought Jung's psychology and Catholic theology could somehow be combined in an interesting way. And he wrote some books on that topic. So at one point, Jung says in a letter to Victor White, I've read some of your essays and it made me ask, do I have faith or do I not have faith? The word faith, And he says, I had to conclude that I do not have faith, but I have respect. I have respect for the Christian religion and its images, its dogmas, and he wrote extensively on Christian topics and themes and on the Bible. He carried a Bible around with him. He read the Bible a lot. He was steeped in biblical text. But I extend the same respect to other religions. I respect Hinduism. I respect Buddhism. I respect Native American beliefs. He visited the Pueblo indigenous people, we call them Pueblo Indians in New Mexico. I think it was 1925, and he had a conversation with one of the leading figures there. And he was so impressed by their belief in nature and their prayers to the sun. He was very moved by that. And so he says, I respect it all. So what does that mean if you respect it, but you don't believe? Jung could go into, and Jungians do this as well. If somebody brings you a dream in which there's an important symbol, you don't believe that the dream actually happened. It happened while you're sleeping in your imagination. And so it's true in that sense. For you, it's a real experience. Your dreams are as real experientially as your waking experiences are. They tend to fade when you wake up, but if you practiced, you can stay in contact with them. But while you're having them, they're very real. People could die of heart attacks in dreams sometimes. They're so frightened by what they experience. And they're very emotional and very powerful. So Jung would treat the Bible, the biblical stories, at that level. If you go to the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem, as I did some years ago, you see the place where Jesus was buried, and there's like a cave there. And I was standing there and with a Jewish friend of mine, and I said, oh, that's where Jesus was buried. You see the tomb is empty. It's empty. See that? And he smiled and said, yes, the tomb is empty. And Christians would believe it's empty because Jesus resurrected. Non-believers would say, oh, well, somebody came and took his body out of there. It's a different way of looking at it. And Jung would look at a story like the resurrection as symbolically true. And I just watched I don't know if you've been watching the funeral service of Queen Elizabeth in Westminster Abbey, and the prayers and the gospel readings about the afterlife, about he who believes in Christ shall never die, and so on. I mean, you can be taken up into an aura of high emotion and conviction in that moment. You're surrounded by angels practically in that cathedral, and everybody's singing. And so it's like a communal experience. And that isn't unreal, but when you leave the cathedral, it may fade like a dream would. You may say, in that moment, I really, really believed that Elizabeth is now in heaven with the angels or with her mother or her father that she loved so much. In that moment, it feels very real. Now, Jung had a word for this. He called it intermediate reality. And he says, of intermediate reality, you don't ask, is it true or false? And it's similar to what Winnicott said about play and transitional space. If a child is playing, it's real. To the child, that play is as real as anything they will ever do in their lives. And you don't ask them, did that dog really fly? You told me your doggy was flying. To the child, in play, that's real. So there's this space that he called transitional space. They're transitional objects that stand for something else. They're symbols. A child will carry a teddy bear, it stands for the mother or something. And you don't ask true and false questions about it. You go into that space with the person and you experience it with them, and you leave it there. So when it comes to religious belief and dogmas, you can think about them as theologians do, and you can experience them. I recently studied Dante's Divine Comedy quite deeply and extensively for a period of time. It was the 700th anniversary of his death in 21. And I was asked to give a lecture in Ravenna. And so I went, I spent about a year studying the Divine Comedy in English. I don't read Italian. So I don't get the beauty of the poetry, but I get the meaning of the words, I think. And if you immerse yourself deeply in Dante's Divine Comedy, you enter into another world. There is the world of the Inferno, the world of Purgatorio, and the world of Paradiso. And Dante's depiction of them is so realistic and so alive. Many of his scholars, Dante's scholars, say this about the characters. In a few words, he creates a living character that have lived for 700 years, people still studying that text and commenting on it. So the world of literature is also this kind of intermediate space. I had a teacher at Yale named Harold Bloom, and he called himself a bardolater. He worshiped Shakespeare. And if you would hear him talk about Hamlet or Lear, or I was recently reading about, he wrote about Othello, Iago, the figure Iago. He could enter that world of Shakespeare and speak from it in a way that was transporting. You would be there with him. You would feel those personalities. And he said, Hamlet is the most real character ever invented. He is more real than Shakespeare. He steps out of the text. He dominates the text. He's more real than the literary Hamlet. He comes to life. So your imagination is a powerful tool for capturing an aspect of psychic reality that if you're only using your rational mind and your senses and doing that kind of work, which is more Freud's level or attempted level, you miss that. And Jung was very good at that. I would say that's where Jung's genius really lay, in the appreciation and the study of imagination, the imaginal world of dreams, myths, fairy tales, what people experience in their souls, not in their bodies necessarily. Dante didn't go physically through these three realms, but imaginatively he experienced them very powerfully and deeply. And we can capture that if we read what Bloom says, deep reading. If you read deeply, and Bloom would say, read slowly and read out loud. And if you do that, you get into the text. And of course, that's how the Bible is read in church. Well, I just listened to it when they were reading those texts from Paul and the gospel. Very well read, beautifully read, so convincing that you can see the angels flying in the space around them. It's very convincing, but that's an imaginal world. So we can't test it with microscopes and telescopes, but we probably could test it with other kinds of instruments. If you could test the minds and hearts of the people who are sitting there listening to it, you would see something. Their brains are activated by that. Like meditators' brains start humming in a different frequency. So it does affect the body also. And that can be measured with the instruments that are now available to students of neuroscience.